Aloha, everyone. Mahalo for joining us for today's webinar, Native Americans in Hawaii, Past, Present, and Future. I apologize if you hear some background noise. There's actually 3 other meetings that are going on around me today. So I'm going to go ahead and just introduce myself, and then I'll have our guest turn it over to our guest speaker so that I can mute myself. So my name is Lisa Leilani Ka'anoi, and I'm the engagement specialist for Maoli Ula Ma Lama Lama, which is the Workforce Development Center, the Healthcare Workforce Development Center at Papa'olalokai. And I'd also like to welcome those that will be joining us later via the recording. I'll just go over some of the housekeeping. So this will be recorded and shared for everyone that registered. So for future reference, if there's a webinar, one of our webinars that you'd like to attend, you do not need to be present. We will automatically send you the recording about 7 to 10 business days after the presentation. You can also use the Q&A feature or the chat feature to submit your questions, comments, or feedback. We'll actually go over them at the end of the presentation. And then also, if you're new here today, just to let you also know that you'll be automatically added to our email list so that you will be able to join us in future presentations. And then also at the end, there will be an evaluation or feedback form that pops up at the end. This is where we helps us get ideas for future topics. But if you don't have time to fill it out after the webinar, we'll follow up with an email on Monday. So just to let you know. So mahalo. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guest speakers. I'll turn it over to Mealiʻi Prieto first.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So good morning, everyone. Aloha kakahiaka. My name is Mealiʻi Prieto, and I am Kanaka ʻŌiwi, and my family's ancestors. We come from the island of Maui and the island of Hawaii. I am also an enrolled and registered member with the Otomazura tribe from Red Rock, Oklahoma, and both my parents are Native Hawaiian, and mom is part Native American Indian. I received my graduate degree from St. Martin's College in Tacoma, Washington. I have a degree in counseling, and we were there stationed at the Joint Base Fort Lewis in Tacoma, Washington. My husband was active duty in the military. And I was also employed for over 20 years as a Child Protective Services social worker in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and also here in Hawaii, in Honolulu. And in the last few years of my career, I spent time as a mental health counselor at the Puyallup Tribal Health Authority in Tacoma, Washington, at the Kawachi Counseling Center. And I was also a health specialist with Ke Olomamo here in Honolulu, which is, Ke Olomamo is a Native Hawaiian healthcare organization, which also services American Indians and Alaska Natives here in Hawaii. I'm now retired with my husband, and I spend much of my time with my youngest grandson. So we take care of him, my husband and I. But I'm also busy with, since 2010, I have been actively involved with the Oahu Intertribal Council here in Honolulu, and I have held various board positions within the organization. And in previous years, I've also volunteered and participated in the Hawaii Council of American Indian Nations, which was an organization here in Hawaii back in the early 70s. And I also volunteered and did some work with the American Indian Powwow Association, which was also here in Hawaii in the early 70s and early 80s as well.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, and thank you everyone for being here. Mahalo Lisa and Papa Olalokahi for hosting us today. Was originally supposed to be for November for Native American Heritage Month, but life happened, so we just mahalo you for accommodating us for the new year. My name is Rosanna Rombawa, and I am Kanako ʻŌiwi, Chiwede Nurechi, Chicana, and of Raramuri descent. My ohana are descendants of Ka'u Moko Keawe, Hana Maui, and the mountains of Sierra Madre. I currently live in the Kapalama Ahupua'a, and I get to listen to Kamakani Olauniu. And so if anyone is interested, I invite you to share the names of the land, water, or winds that you want to call into this space in the chat as a way to share and exchange the forces that nurture us. A little bit more about me. I was born on Oahu, raised in the military as a Special Forces Army brat. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear my puppy in the background, but I graduated from UH with my master's in social work with the specialization in behavioral mental health, where I conducted policy research, informing cultural strategic planning for the Department of Social Work, and then also policy research for sex trafficking in Hawaii for Department of Human Services. And then over the last 10 years, I volunteered with Oahu Intertribal Council while working in all kind of industries, marketing, fundraising, and event planning, loan processing, substance use treatment for adjudicated youth, urban planning and program development, and now housing policy a little bit as well. So that's it for me. Just thanks again, everyone, for being here with us today. And I will turn it back over to Lisa.
Mahalo. So I will go ahead and pull up the slides. Let's see here. Can everybody see that? Okay. So one of the first questions, and please feel free to submit your questions. This is really informal. We might have some extra time at the end to go over anything else that you guys are interested in. But what I'd like to start off with is what is the history of American Indians and Alaska Natives in Hawaii?
Yeah, so I can start. I guess for me, the biggest takeaway kind of briefly about the history of Native Americans in Hawaii is that there really is a long-standing relationship between indigenous peoples of Oceania and Turtle Island. And since the majority of our cultures are, oral, we have a lot of stories and anecdotal evidence to support that. For example, I'll give you a couple examples. So some of our family friends, or as we call them, relatives on the Hopi Reservation, taught us about a dance called huli, where they twist and turn. And so if you olelo, you might know that the same word huli also means to turn in Hawaiian. Another uncle who was a traditional Hawaiian cacao practitioner shared a mo'olelo and a story of people in South America that he learned who came and were healers to the Spanish conquistadors and also to the Aztec warriors, but they refused to take sides and fight, but they came in and provided healing to these people. Then there's also the sweet potato that originated in the Incan Empire, but was mysteriously found in Polynesia, over 400 years before Europeans set foot on the continent. And then I've also heard stories about my own ancestors, Chiwere Nurachi ancestors, trading peyote, ceremonial elements to the Raramuri of northern Mexico, where some of my father's side is from. And then also, we have some board members who are Alaska Native on Oahu Intertribal Council. And so there's a lot of connection and parallels to the canoe paddling and voyaging cultural practices and traditions of the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, and of course here in Hawaii. And so that's all pre-contact, right? So post-colonial contact, you know, we're getting into the eras of attempted genocide, but these relationships still exist and continue to evolve. And so according to some data in Nupepa that we've come across, there were groups of natives from the East Coast who were actually enslaved and forced on whaling ships out of Boston over to Maui. And then of course, the military, especially the American military, you know, in all the wars, benefited greatly from the cultural value that Native Americans place on warriors in our society. And so we have the highest per capita rate of service than any other ethnic group. And so, you know, other institutions like religion and education, medicine, law enforcement, you know, all those things kind of government functioned as tools of white supremacy, you know, not only in Turtle Island indigenous people populations, but also in Oceania. And so that's another series of webinars. But the main takeaway is that there's a long-standing relationship. And so it's really important to remember that, you know, that we as indigenous people have always had shared cultures, traded, and really had relationship and community with one another.
Mahalo for that. So how far back down your family line on the American Indian side goes back to when they first came to Hawaii?
So I'll take that question, Lisa. So our family, we get often asked, how is it that your American Indian relatives, how did you meet with your Native Hawaiian relatives? How did that relationship happen? People are often curious. Because Oklahoma is in the middle of the, you know, the US, and Hawaii, we're in the middle of the ocean. So they're curious about how that relationship happened. So my mother's family, we are Otomazura, like we mentioned earlier. And our people migrated, well, we lived up in the Great Lakes area and Northwest Nebraska area of the US, and forced relocation by our government moved us to where our reservation is currently in Red Rock, Oklahoma. And our tribe is very small. There's only about 3,000 of us registered members. And my grandfather, who is a full-blood Otomazura, he, as a young child, was taken to boarding school in Oklahoma. And often ran away. He ran back home because he, you know, didn't like what was happening there in boarding school. So he ran away quite often, but was always taken back to boarding school. And finally, on one of these many trips, he had had enough and figured out a way how to join the US military, the Army. So he signed up, and Grandpa got on a ship and came to Honolulu, where he met my Hawaiian tutu, my grandmother, and they married and had 3 children, one of course, which was my mother. But unfortunately, my grandfather died at a really young age. So my mother did not have that relationship with her father. She was only 3 years old when he passed away. So, but my tutu, my grandmother, always encouraged my mother and reminded her of her Native American ancestry, and told my mother that, we have family, we have relatives in Oklahoma, so, make those connections as soon as you can. And that's something that's always stayed with my mother. And of course, which she passed on to us, my siblings. So following that, the Native American community in Honolulu today sort of evolved as a somewhat organized group in the early 70s. So there was a group of Native American Indian women living here in Hawaii, one of course, which was my mother, and several of them had connections with the military. And so during that time, they saw a need, they realized there was a need within the military community. There were many American Indian soldiers who were stationed here in Hawaii at the time, and they realized that these soldiers had no place to gather, to practice their ceremony, their traditions, to dance, or to stay connected with other American Indian families. So these women started hosting small potluck gatherings down at the beach and at the park, and they would invite all these American Indian soldiers, military guys to come out. And before you know it, they invited their friends and other relatives. And so it eventually grew over time. And so in the early, I think it was 1971, when the Hawaii Council of American Indian Nations was formed. It was a nonprofit group here in Hawaii. And they offered so it was an American Indian Center here, and they offered substance abuse and alcohol counseling. They also provided job training. They did educational presentations out in the community. They did some community outreach work. And of course, they held an annual intertribal powwow every year. So that was happening in the community. And around the early 80s, of course, the American Indian Powwow Association was organized. And their job primarily at the time was to organize and coordinate our powwow, because the powwow was starting to grow, and we were starting to invite more family and dancers and drum groups from the mainland. And so that was their job until 2013. And that's when the Oahu Intertribal Council evolved. We got our nonprofit status at that time. So we we have our own organization now, where we kind of offer the same kinds of things, or at least we're trying to offer the same kind of things that our ancestors offered earlier. So our mission statement, of course, is to share and provide and promote Native American culture here in Hawaii. And we do that by going out into the schools and with educational presentations. We do also some community outreach work. We offer cultural exchanges. When American Indian groups from Turtle Island come to visit Hawaii, we like to hook up with them and introduce them to our Native Hawaiian relatives here. And there's a cultural exchange that usually happens. And also we still host the annual intertribal powwow. And this year, of course, God willing, in 2022, we are hoping to have our 46th annual intertribal powwow. And this year, it will be held at the Bishop Museum in downtown Honolulu on September 10th and 11th. So if anybody's around, you guys want to come out, please come out and join us. Just stay tuned to our Facebook, Instagram, and social media accounts, and to get all the latest news on that. And I think, Lisa, yeah.
So currently, how many Native American organizations are there? And are they throughout all the islands, or just mainly Oahu?
Well, here on Oahu, I believe we're the only organized nonprofit group on Oahu in Honolulu. And the outer islands, the island of Hawaii, there's one, and I can't remember her name now, the group of what they call themselves, but they have a Native American group there. Kauai also has a annual powwow, except of course with COVID, they haven't been having their powwows. Once upon a time, Maui used to be very active in the American Indian community as well. But for now, I think we're the only organized nonprofit group in Hawaii.
Mahalo. So how do you all keep in touch? Like, let's say I'm moving to Oahu or Hawaii, and I want to get in touch with other Native Americans that, you know, to be part of a community. How would someone do that?
Sorry, Rosie, you want to take, Rosanna, you want to take that one?
Sure. So we have a lot of different people that, you know, kind of groups that we've noticed as far as Native American populations that are coming from Turtle Island to Hawaii. So there's, of course, the military, as Mealiʻi mentioned, and these groups are kind of, you know, they're away from home. There's no large reservation, tribal reservation here. So oftentimes they're looking for cultural support. They may be homesick. And then there's a lot of students from college that come, and, you know, young college students want to enjoy the lifestyle that Hawaii here has to offer. But a lot of them are also similarly, you know, first time off the reservation, looking to get connected and learn more about the different cultures here, and as well as share and exchange the practices that they've grown up with. And then there's a lot of transplants and transients groups, kind of subgroups within those. And I guess the best way, you know, of getting connected really so far has just been through the powwow. It's kind of this big annual gathering. There's a lot of promotion about it, and so it piques a lot of Native American interest in that, you know, visiting here to kind of seek out and get involved and participate in some way.
Mahalo. So then my next question is, how large is the community? I know that, you know, we have census data. Can you talk a little bit more about that so we can get a feel for, like, you know, how big the community, the Native American community is here?
Sure. So the current US Census, the 2020 US Census shows that there are over 41,000 Native American people living here in Hawaii, and they identify with either being full Native American or part Native American mixed with other different ethnicities. And Honolulu, or this island, the island of Oahu, we have the most at 25,000 residents who identify with being Native American Indian. And that has grown over the years. I think the 2010 census, I think we were at 33,000. So, and now it's at 41,000. So, you know, we're starting to see some growth of natives coming to the islands. And we've also noticed in our work here with the American Indian community that there's different groups of local natives who identify with being American Indian. And what we saw is that many of the American Indian people that are born and raised here on Oahu, they actually have many of them have no connection to their Turtle Island relatives. They, you know, they're often mixed with a Polynesian race or an Asian ethnicity. And so they're born and raised here and have no real connection to their relatives. And so but they are anxious to learn. They want to know more about their culture and build relationships. And so they come out to the powwow when they see that events are happening around the island, and they come up and they introduce themselves and they ask for our help in helping them to connect with their family. And they also share that sometimes within their own family, they are not allowed to talk about their American Indian heritage because there may be some shame in being part American Indian and another culture, Native Hawaiian or whatever. And so they're not able to share or talk with their family members. So they come out and they introduce themselves and want to know more about where they come from. So we're always willing to work with them and help them and have them be a part of our community.
Yeah, and I guess I mentioned some of the other groups that, that we see before, the subgroups, a lot of military families, single soldiers with different kinds of backgrounds and experiences coming, wanting to connect, or in some ways, some of them are no different from, any other person that just wants to come to Hawaii and relocate here in the islands. So we see a lot of different kinds of American Indians that are coming and going. So kind of going back to that idea of this long-standing relationship between these different cultures and indigenous groups. Yeah.
And I guess this goes into my next question, because not a lot of people may understand how many tribes there are and, what the different protocols are, if they're different. So for someone who's brand new, just learning that how large the Native American community is here, I'm going to refer to the slide. So what considerations of the Native American community should we, have now that we know how long you've been here and how big the community is?
So we realized with some of these groups that Rosanna was mentioning that they have a lot of unique needs. So we realize that some of them are American Indians that are here. They are very proud of their American Indian heritage. And so when they come here, they see the Native Hawaiian culture is very similar to the American Indian culture in that we're really family-centered and community-centered. So they feel a really close connection to the Hawaiian community, and they want to connect and be a part of our culture. And so they actually become immersed or active and participate in the Native Hawaiian culture. They actually want to learn our language. They enroll themselves in hula classes. They enroll their children in Hawaiian charter schools. They participate in a lot of the Native Hawaiian sports here, in canoe clubs. So they really connect with the Native Hawaiian culture in that way. And also we saw that some American Indians that are here, they really, they choose to remain absent or not participate. They don't want to engage. They because they may be leaving a situation back home from the reservation where something may have happened. So they come to Hawaii to escape and to get away. And so we respect that, and but they may come out and introduce themselves, and they may come and spend a few hours at the powwow, but then they disappear and we don't see them again. They just want to stay disconnected from their own Native American culture, but may come out and participate in some of the Native Hawaiian cultural activities. So those are some of the things that we have seen. I don't know, Rosie, is there anything else that you might want to add?
No, I guess we'll get into some of the things that we try to do to support these different groups. I don't know if you had any other thoughts or questions, Lisa, on that specifically.
Not really, just trying to get a feel for, some of the issues, because, Hawaii is the only state that doesn't have a reservation and it's not reservation centered. And so trying to, I guess, understand what it is, once they come here, or, Native Americans come here, what the expectations are, and if it's everything they wanted it, or if it's something that they just didn't, it's a culture shock. And I guess also I wanted to ask you both, like, what are the common questions you guys get, right? As far as anything that has to do with, how do I connect, or, what are inappropriate questions that people may ask, or innocent questions people may ask regarding powwows or teepees? Because I know for a lot of the indigenous cultures, the common theme is Halloween costumes, right? Our regalia is not your costume, right? And don't appropriate it. That's a common thing. And just kind of want to get a feel for what kind of questions that commonly come up for you guys.
I guess we get, so if we going into like what OIC as an organization has done and what different community groups have done, we get a lot of interesting requests and a lot of different, I mean, you kind of mentioned it before about the diversity of Native Americans in general. And so we do get a lot of diverse questions. And not just Native American, but, non-Indigenous, Caucasian, asking these kinds of questions about protocol and how do we be respectful. And it's very interesting. I think these are all conversations that need to be had in different ways and about different topics. Because I think in a lot of ways, we as Indigenous people aren't always able to process a lot of the effects of the trauma that we've been through, just as Indigenous groups in overall. And so when we get different requests of people wanting to either reconnect to their culture or be respectful of the cultures here, or maybe they're just unaware and a little offensive in how they're asking or what they're asking, it kind of is a run of the gamut. It ranges, but our role really is, one, to be that bridge between Turtle Island relatives and Indigenous Kanaka here in Hawaii or throughout Oceania, and then also to provide that educational knowledge and resource to the community. So we don't, we no topic is off the table. We are, an educational organization, I guess, if that kind of answers your question. I don't know if you have anything else.
Sorry, Lisa. I think I want to add that we do get a lot of questions. People email us, text us, they call us, and some of the questions I'm, really dumbfounded. For example, we get a lot of questions or a lot of requests from people that want us to come out and preside over a death of a family member, a relative who has passed away here in Hawaii. So they want to know, is there a medicine man on the island? Is there a shaman on the island? Is there someone that can come out and sing a song? And we get requests to I think one recently, Rosanna, if you can remember, it was a request from a PhD, a student from the mainland who was here doing some research. And he was taking from the water some specimens and taking it back to the East Coast, and wanted to know what the protocol was for that. So that kind of threw me for a loop. Another request was someone was offering to pay us good money to come out to their home and decorate their home in Native American decor and provide Native American music for a family member, a birthday celebration. And I just didn't know how to respond to that. But I did give her some ideas and told her, you know, that's not something that we really do as an organization, but I did, you know, give her a few ideas. So like Rosanna was saying, the questions that we get, you know, run the gamut. And a lot of them are not from people necessarily that live here on the island, but who come and visit or who are curious. So yeah, there's all kinds of things. So, but as an organization, Oahu Intertribal Council, when I get these kinds of questions, you know, you know, I have to think about, well, is this something we should offer? Should we have, you know, a spiritual healer or a medicine person on our board, on our staff, so we can help address some of those requests that do come in. So, you know, they are kind of helpful. They are, you know, they make us relook at our mission and what we're doing here in Hawaii.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, you know, it really is being able to look at what are, you know, our values as an organization and how can we honor both of those roles where we're getting these different types of requests and versus how do we, you know, provide the cultural exchange aspect of what we do as well. And so that's something we're always looking to grow and expand as far as partnerships between different Indigenous groups. I think that is more added value than kind of trying to educate some of these things that are also available online. You know, we can have more meaningful exchange and relationship building, and that be the educational services that's provided rather than you know, pretending like we're Google.
Good point. Yeah, that kind of is a shocker. Come decorate my house in Native American theme. That just, okay.
Yeah, we get all kinds of stuff.
So, well, here's a specific one that I know folks may not know, right? So one time I was at Whole Foods and I saw sage being sold at Whole Foods, right? So, you know, as an ally, as another Indigenous, you know, being Native Hawaiian, I want to support Native American, you know, traditions. So it's like, okay, so why is Whole Foods selling sage? Can you talk a little bit more about how that has become kind of easily accessible? Like it's not being protected.
I mean, that's a phenomenon that's been happening not just to, you know, Turtle Island relatives and cultures, but, you know, yoga is a prime example of how, you know, certain groups of people of color have different cultural practices and traditions and how they can often be co-opted by, you know, non-Indigenous or non-practicing groups and talking about cultural appropriation and things like that. So I think it's something that we can all learn and be more aware of, and, you know, be willing to have these conversations about what is appropriate or not appropriate, or what feels respectful or disrespectful. But really, you know, if we're able to shift our focus more onto like what are things that are important to us as Indigenous relatives, and how do we kind of share that collective power that we have as we continue to ally, like what are the things that we want to build together. Yeah, because, you know, we could go all day about what non-Indigenous groups do or have done and continue to do, and how that, you know, perpetuates these inequities in our communities. But really, you know, looking at what we as a group have been doing to support Native Americans here in Hawaii. You know, I don't know if you want to touch on some stuff, May. You've done some really incredible things, especially when COVID hit, to really help serve some of the different Native American groups and different communities here in Hawaii.
Mahalo for that. There is a question. Oh, sweat lodge. That's a good question. Is there a sweat lodge on Oahu?
Once upon a time, there was a sweat lodge here. There were several individuals who hosted sweat lodges. I know they were in Waianae, Waimanalo, and I know Sand Island. But they, the individuals that hosted these sweat lodges have moved back to the reservation. They're no longer here. So I haven't heard of any sweat lodges happening, you know, of course, within the last couple of years. So, but that's something definitely we need to look into again.
Mahalo. So I'd like to open it up to folks if they want to ask questions of Rosie and May. And also, I guess, you know, the last slide that I had put up was about, you know, the visions and prayers for the future. So where do you see OIC or the Native American community in general heading into the future?
I guess I kind of touched on it a little bit, that, you know, I would really like to see us as Indigenous peoples and stewards of the planet and our shared humanity. You know, we have all these shared values, though we may be very diverse on a micro level. I would really like to see us come together more and leverage our collective power as Indigenous people. You know, because you got to remember, in the same way that Oceania is really diverse, there's, you know, Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, Australasian, and then even within that, there's Polynesia has Maori, Kanaka, Samoan, etc. Micronesian has Costa Rican, Pohnpeian, Chuukese, that kind of thing. So in the way that Oceania is super diverse, similarly, Native Americans are really diverse. And I think you mentioned this earlier too. You know, there's over 500 federally recognized tribes, and that's just the ones that are federally recognized. That's not the ones who are not recognized by the federal government, nor the ones that, you know, succumb to the practices of genocide against Indigenous people. So I guess, you know, moving forward in the future, my prayer would be that, you know, we come together a little bit more and leverage our shared power together. You know, I believe that oftentimes we're not either aware of, as Indigenous people, we aren't allowed to, or we don't have the tools available to acknowledge the effects of the trauma of sustained colonialism and the poor determinants of health that we see in our communities on the reservations. You know, for Native Americans, especially in Canada and the US, you know, children were stolen from their parents and separated. We lost entire generations. And this isn't, you know, something out of a history book. My auntie and her sister were taken from their parents and sent to live separately, one to be raised in boarding school, one to be raised in by a religious family. You know, so there's, you know, as a result of these legacies of genocide and its current existence in our daily lives, you know, we as Indigenous people, we have a lot to heal, to grieve, we have a lot to work through. And often, you know, I believe we're not in a position to do so for those of us who don't have the same access to, you know, education, upward social mobility and things like that. And so this leads to the things that we see, the overrepresentation in criminal justice system, foster care, social services, the disparate rates of sexual violence of missing and murdered Indigenous women, just poor health outcomes that we see over and over again. And so within our communities, we're also trying to, coping with the lateral violence and the shame and rejection, high suicide rates, anti-Blackness, complying and perpetuating colonial destruction, not only against each other and within our own families, but then as we may visit other Indigenous people in other places. And so for the future, my prayer is that we can experience more kindness, create more space for self-love, for healing and acceptance, and working through those things, and really less concern for what Western culture is doing, what their colonial systems expect from us, and really just coming together and being better relatives to each other. So that's my soapbox.
That's awesome.
I just wanted to add that all of these things that Rosanna just mentioned, our vision, or my vision, is to restore the American Indian Community Center that was once here back in the early 70s. I'd like us to have a place where Indigenous peoples could come together and gather and share their stories and their cultures and get to know one another. So I would like us to actually have a place where we can do that, and as a community here in Hawaii. So we take checks, cash, Venmo. Anybody wants to donate, we're happy to take your money. But in all seriousness, however, we are looking to partner with other Native Hawaiian organizations so we can help extend our reach in the community. So mahalo.
Where was that center previously?
The first American Indian Center here in Honolulu opened up in actually Kalihi on Colburn Street. It's upstairs on the second floor. It was there for several years, but they moved around. They had an office out by the airport. They had an office down by Ala Moana. Also at Palama Settlement, they had an office there. So I'm always looking for space.
Nice. So we do have a question. My mom is German and from the continent. We've done our best to educate our non-Indigenous family about what it means to be Native Hawaiian. After all these years, it is still a novelty to them. How would you suggest creating a better dialogue for family members that are non-Indigenous?
I think for me, it's all about, what I've learned from my kupuna is that it's talk stories, wala'au is a big part of having an exchange of ideas. But also, other parts of learning are, especially for Kanaka, is you learn by observing and you learn by doing. And so there's, things that we don't necessarily learn in conversation, and you can, teach and teach all day, but until, there's a genuine exchange of relationship and community, share a meal. I know it's hard because of COVID, but, going to a relative's baby luau, I mean, you experience Hawaiians living as Hawaiians today in Hawaii. And that often is the biggest heart opener and mind shifter when you get to experience, when you're privileged to experience the aloha that Hawaiians really do or can embody, when we're connected to these kinds of things. So I'm sorry, I don't have any 101 tips for that, but you gotta experience things sometimes to really get the message.
Mahalo for that. The next question is, does anyone teach powwow dancing like grass, fancy, jingle, etc., as well as drumming?
We don't really have any formal classes, you know, of course, because of the pandemic. Once upon a time, we did offer a hoop dance class, and we do have drum practice. We were having that like every month. But we haven't had anything for a while. So nothing formal. You know, of course, that's something we do want to put on our calendar this year to have more organized classes and workshops. But, you know, given the situation is kind of, you know, touch and go. We want to do this, we want to do that. And then again, having members in our community, a lot of them, like our drummers, we do have drum guys in the community who, you know, there's always work commitments and those, you know, school and those kinds of things. So trying to get everyone organized, especially now, has been difficult, but it's definitely something that we are looking at for this year.
Great. Oh, Hardy, aloha Hardy. So Hardy Spoor is a former executive director of Papaʻola Kahi, and he says, mahalo for great discussion. Would be wonderful to link up for Healing Our Spirit Worldwide. The next conference is in Vancouver in 2023. We can check out the website. And then Juanita is the US program lead for our company's Indigenous network, supporting all Indigenous partners. She would love to talk story. Okay, we got your email address. We'll definitely keep in touch. Again, we have still some time left for folks who want to ask any other questions or have any comments or feedback. Let's see here. Thank you for all your sharing. Hi, CJ. CJ is from the Department of Health. Thank you all for sharing. This was very valuable. No public question or comment. Awesome. So the next powwow is going to be, oh, I'll put up the slide. So this is their social media. If you want to follow the Oahu Intertribal Council on Facebook and Instagram. I also put the website in the chat, the link, and then also the email address is info@oichawaii.org. And I just want to mahalo you both for your flexibility as well in being able to continue the presentation, even though we had it originally in November. Is there, you know, a question I have is, how can we help amplify or support you and the Native American community?
Well, this has been really helpful, this type of discussion and conversation. You know, when COVID hit, we just really partnered with different groups that were responding to immediate needs in the community, from military, families, houseless, you know, just people who were really in need by different issues exacerbated by COVID. And so we kind of paused our, you know, getting out there for ourselves, and really we're getting out there for others. And so this has been an awesome opportunity to do so. So we're open to more, and, you know, we're always open.
I know, my pet peeve is I always cringe when I see non-Indigenous people selling sage. I just want to steal it all. It's just like, shame on you. What are you doing?
You just gonna say, hey, where's my cut?
Yeah, exactly. What the heck? And then for those of you that actually don't know, I am Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian as well. And so that's the Alaska Native that's on the Oahu Intertribal Council would be me. So yes, the cultures are very, very different, but still the same. So if you have any questions about Alaska Native tribes, I'm your go-to. Okay. Oh, Lisa, my family, Tlingit and Haida. Wonderful. My tribe is actually it's called Siberian Yupik, or what we call Sivukak Yupik. And there's some tribes that some peoples like Greenland and Iceland do not like the term Eskimo. It's very, yes, St. Lawrence Island, exactly. That don't like the term Eskimo. It's a slur, an Arctic slur. But for some reason, in my area, currently in Alaska, even my friends and family that I've grown up with still use that term kind of like a term of endearment. So you really, for something like that, I would just ask once you find out someone's Alaska Native, if that term is appropriate to use or not. Because I know my younger cousins are trying to not use that term anymore. So it's just really all kind of all over the place. This has been wonderful. I wish we could have more time. Maybe we can do a part 2, but we'll definitely keep in touch with the folks that put their contact information in the chat box. And if there aren't any more questions, I guess we'll go ahead and maybe stick around for a little bit for those that want to maybe ask more questions on a little more private scale. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And the next presentation will be on the 28th. That will be January's National Mentoring Month. So we have invited Palama Lee, who also used to work at Papalolokahi. We're going to have him talk about mentoring. And then we don't have any speakers lined up for February yet, but we'll keep you all posted. Like I said, you'll all automatically be added to our email group. So malama pono, everyone. Take care. And then if I could just ask May and Rosie to stay on, then we can talk story a little bit afterwards. So mahalo for joining us, everybody.
Aloha.
Hello. Thank you so
Mahalo.
much.